Road trip.
Here we go.
Keep your legs tucked down.
So, should they join us on supper for Subway, or they need to go home right away?
We're on a mission to go back to Casa de Hire. All right.
Okay.
Should I get my keys?
Recording video's on. Yay.
Yeah, made sometime.
So I know your house is that way.
Yeah, by Bolai. Yeah.
Is it like across the street from Burleigh?
But here again. When you go to
What's it called? What's the name of the road?
Bolai, we turn Bolai. You by the Turs.
When they reached
Okay,
the ground,
I think I remember that.
they started through the field. Look, that guy is waving at us, said Annie. The man tending the cows was shouting and waving. He started running toward them. Uh-oh, what's he want? Said Jack. A moment later, the man stood in their path. He was young and handsome with a kind face. Can you do me a great favor? He asked. I would be most grateful.
Okay.
Of course, said Annie. Give a message to the silk weaver. You will see her at the farmhouse, said the young man. Tell her to meet me here at twilight. Sure, no problem, said Annie. The young man smiled. Thank you, he said. Then he started to leave.
The truck.
Wait,
Yeah, it's a furniture
excuse
truck.
me, said Jack.
The ones where the
Do you
couch
know where
travel.
we can find the Imperial Library?
Well,
A
might
look
get-
of
we
horror
might
crossed
get
the
a new
man's
windows
kind
from my
face.
house.
Why?
You're gonna roll
He
down your
whispered.
windows?
No, we might get.
I
You're
just
getting new
wondered,
windows.
said
Okay.
Jack. The young man shook his head.
I was gonna say when I was in Point,
Beware
a
of the
truck like that
Dragon
dropped
King,
off my bed.
he said. Whatever you do,
Really?
beware. Then he turned and ran back to his cows. Oh man,
That's the one when
whispered
you're
Jack. Now we know one thing for sure. What? Asked Annie. This place is not as peaceful as it
You
seems,
know where it's a Turs
Jack
is?
said.
Yeah.
And then to the left. To the left.
Chapter 3.
Okay.
The Silk Weaver.
Go.
And I know where to.
Jack and Annie kept walking across the
A little bit.
pasture toward the road.
Yeah.
Annie
Yeah.
stopped when they neared the farmhouse.
So
We
you
have
turn
to
that
find
way
the
and
Silk
then that
Weaver
way.
and give her the message, she said. Let's do that on our way back, said Jack. I'm worried about finding the Imperial Library. What if we don't have time? Said Annie. We promised, and he was so nice.
And then.
Jack sighed. Okay, he said, but let's find her fast, and remember to keep your head down so no one will notice us. Jack and Annie bowed their heads as they headed toward the house. As they got closer, Jack peeked out from under his hat. An ox pulled a cart filled with hay. Men hoed the ground. Women pushed wheelbarrows piled high with grain. There, said Annie. She pointed to an open porch where a young woman was weaving cloth on a loom. That must be her. Annie ran to the silk weaver. Jack looked around to see if anyone was watching. Luckily, all the farm workers seemed too busy to notice anything. Still looking around carefully, Jack walked toward the porch. Annie was already talking to the silk weaver. What did he say? The young woman asked. Her voice was soft but strong. Her dark eyes glowed with happiness. He said you should meet him in the field at twilight, said Annie. He's so handsome. Yes, he is. The silk weaver gave Annie a shy smile.
This one up here?
Then she reached down to a basket near her loom and picked up a ball of yellow thread.
Okay.
It was very brave of you to bring the message, she said. Please accept this silk thread as my thank you. She handed Annie the ball of silk. It's beautiful, said Annie. Feel. She handed it to Jack. The thread was smooth and soft. How do you make silk? Said Jack.
Yeah.
It is made from the cocoons of silk worms, said the weaver. Really? Worms? That's neat, said Jack. Let me write that down. He reached into his sack. Please don't, said the silk weaver. The making of silk is China's most valuable secret. Anyone who steals the secret will be arrested. The Dragon King will have him put to death. Oops, said Jack. He dropped the ball of silk into his sack. I think you must leave quickly, whispered the silk weaver. You have been seen.
Is your house made of peaches?
Jack looked over his shoulder. A man was pointing at them. Let's go,
This
he
is the
said.
one.
Bye, said Annie. Good luck on your date.
Yeah, you're welcome,
Thank
guys.
you, the silk weaver said. Come on,
There's a red car
said
there.
Jack.
Stop
They hurried
first.
away from the silk weaver. Stop! Someone shouted. Run!
Chris's
said
stuff.
Annie.
Bye, Evan.
You know how to get the seatbelts?
Chapter 4. The Great Wall.
You gotta press that button. You
Jack
already
and
did.
Annie ran around the farmhouse.
There you go,
At the
buddy.
back was an ox cart filled with bags of grain. There was no one in sight.
Bye.
The shouting behind them got louder. Jack and Annie looked at each other, then dived into the back of the wooden cart. They buried themselves in the middle of the bags of grain. Jack's heart pounded as the shouts came closer. He held his breath and waited for the people to
dog's here.
leave. Suddenly the cart lurched forward. Someone was driving them away. Jack and Annie peeked over the bags. Jack saw the back of the driver. He was calmly steering the ox cart over the dirt road. They were on their way to the walled city. Jack and Annie ducked down again. This is great, whispered
Right, you
Annie.
can actually put your seat
All we
back.
have
So
to
if you
do
reach
is
under your
jump out
seat,
when we get into the
all
city.
the way down, like
Yep.
basically between your
Jack
legs,
said softly.
there's a bar under
Then
your
we'll
seat.
find the Imperial
front
Library,
of your
find
seat.
the book, and get back
Not
to the
that
magic
one, the other
treehouse.
one. Yeah, goof. Here.
Whispered Annie.
There.
Whoa! The
Ta-da!
cart slowly came to
There
a
you go.
halt. Jack
Now your
held his
legs
breath.
can breathe again.
He heard voices
Now the video can see
and the
both my
heavy
legs.
tramping of feet. Lots of feet. He and Annie peeked out. Oh man, he whispered. A long line of men was crossing the road in front of the cart. They carried axes, shovels, and hoes. Guards marched alongside them. Let's find out what's happening, said Jack. He reached into a sack and pulled out the china book. Pushing his glasses into place, he found a picture of the workers. He read,
See, what is
"The
that?
Dragon King forced many of his subjects to start building a wall to protect China from invaders. Later emperors made the wall even longer. Finally, it stretched 3,700 miles along China's border. The Great Wall of China is the longest structure ever built." "Wow, the Great Wall of China," said Jack. "I've heard of that," said Annie. "Who hasn't?" said Jack. "Those guys are going to work on it right now." Just then someone grabbed Jack and Annie. They looked up. It was the driver of the cart. "Who are you?" he asked angrily. Jack didn't know what to say. The man's gaze fell on the open book in Jack's hands. His mouth dropped open. He let go of Jack and Annie. Slowly, he reached out and touched the book. He looked back at Jack and Annie with wide eyes. "What is this?" he said. Chapter 5. The Scholar. "It's a book from our country," said Jack. "Your books are made of bamboo, but ours are made of paper. Actually, your country invented paper, but later, in the future." The man looked confused. "Never mind," said Annie. "It's for reading. It's for learning about faraway places." The man stared at them. Tears filled his eyes. "What's wrong?" Annie asked softly. "I love reading and learning," he said. "So do I," said Jack. The man smiled. "You don't understand. I am dressed as a farmer," he said. "But in truth, I am a scholar." "What's a scholar?" said Annie. "We are great readers, learners, and writers," he said. "We have long been the most honored citizens in China." The scholar's smile faded. "But now scholars are in danger," he said, "and many of us have gone into hiding." "Why?" said Jack. "The Dragon King is afraid of the power of our books and learning," said the scholar. "He wants people to think only what he wants them to think. Any day, he may order the burning of the books." Annie gasped. "Does that mean what I think it means?" said Jack. The scholar nodded. "All the books in the Imperial Library will be burned," he said. "That's rotten," said Annie. "Indeed, it is," the scholar said quietly. "Listen, we have a mission to get a book from that library," said Jack. "Who are you?" asked the scholar. "Show him," said Annie. She reached into her shirt pocket as Jack reached into his sack. They brought out the secret library cards. The letters shimmered in the sunlight. The scholar's mouth dropped open again. "You are master librarians," he said. "I have never met ones so honored who were so young." He bowed to show his respect. "Thank you," said Jack and Annie. They bowed back to him. "How can I help you?" asked the scholar. "We need to go to the Imperial Library and find this book," said Jack. He held out Morgan's bamboo strip to the scholar. "We will go to the Imperial Library," said the scholar. "As for the story, I know it well. It is a true one, written not long ago. But I warn you, we will be in great danger." "We know," said Annie.
Food.
The scholar smiled. "I am happy to be doing something I believe in again," said the scholar. "Let us go." They all climbed into the front of the cart. The long line of wall builders was marching in the distance.
That's weird.
As the oxen started forward, the scholar turned to Jack and Annie. "Where are you
Must have
from?"
been the other street.
he asked. "Frog Creek, Pennsylvania," said Annie. "I have never heard of it," said the scholar. "Do they have a library there?" "Oh, sure. There's a library in every
so
town,"
much traffic
said
out
Jack.
today, I have
"In
to-
fact, there are probably thousands of libraries in our country." "And millions of books," said Annie. "And no one burns them." "Right," said Jack. "Everyone gets to go to school to learn to read them." The scholar stared at him and shook his head. "It sounds like paradise," he said. Chapter 6. The Dragon King. The ox cart bumped across the wooden bridge that crossed over a moat. Then it passed guards standing by giant wooden gates. "Are the gates ever closed?" Jack asked. "Oh yes, every day at sunset," said the scholar. "When the gong sounds, the gates close. The bridge comes up and the city is sealed shut for the night." "I guess visitors have to leave before that happens," Annie said. "Or they'll be stuck here for the whole night, right?"
Go this way.
"Yes," said the scholar.
I'm just backtracking.
The
'cause
cart
there's so much
bumped
traffic.
between the city
Nowhere
gates.
for me to
Rows of small houses were bunched
It's like an
together
hour
on
to
either
get
side
to
of the street.
station.
They were made of mud with straw roofs. People cooked over outdoor fires. They washed their clothes in wooden tubs. As the ox cart bumped along, the houses got larger. These were made of painted wood and pottery tiles. They all had curved roofs. "Why are those roofs like that?" asked Jack. "To keep away the bad spirits," said the scholar. "How do they do that?" said Annie. "The spirits can only travel in straight lines," said the scholar. "Wow," whispered Annie. The cart went by some open tea shops. Then it passed a large market square filled with stalls and shoppers. People were buying and
way?
selling fish, chickens, firewood, wagon wheels, silk cloth, furs,
Kind
and
of.
jade jewelry.
That
Some
could
people
move
were
this way.
lined up at a stall filled with tiny cages.
Issue.
"What's for sale
is-
there?" said
Like I said, it's
Annie.
just- there's so much traffic
"Crickets,"
today.
the
I
scholar
actually have
said.
to
"They make
basically
good
wiggle
pets.
my
You can
way around
feed
the
them tea
neighborhood.
leaves and enjoy
Just
their
so we can get
delicate
back.
song."
It must have been the train.
The
That's
cart
why there's,
moved on
like,
toward the Dragon
million cars
King's
over
walled
there.
palace. They stopped in front of the palace gates.
We're on
"Grain
an
delivery!"
adventure.
the scholar shouted up to the guard at the tower. The guard waved them through. Inside were beautiful gardens and huge mounds of earth surrounded by a low brick wall. "That is the Imperial burial grounds," said the scholar, pointing at the mounds. "Who is buried there?" asked Jack. "The ancestors of the Dragon King," said the scholar. "What are ancestors?" Annie asked. "They are the people in your family who lived before you," said the scholar. "Someday the Dragon King himself will be buried there. 300,000 workers have been building his burial tomb." "Oh man," said Jack. He looked over his shoulder at the burial grounds. He wondered why it took so many workers to build a tomb. "No," said the scholar. Jack whirled around. "What's wrong?" he asked. The scholar pointed at the palace courtyard. A dark cloud of smoke was rising into the sky. "Fire!" said the scholar. "The books!" said Jack. "Hurry!" said Annie. The scholar snapped the reins. The oxen trotted up the stone path. When the cart rolled into the courtyard, soldiers were everywhere. Some threw wood on a huge bonfire. Others were carrying bamboo strips down the steep stairs that led from the palace. "Are those books?" asked Jack. "Yes, the strips are tied together into different bundles," moaned the scholar. "Each bundle is a book." "Look," said Annie, pointing to the palace entrance. Stepping outside was a man in a rich flowing robe and a tall hat. Jack knew him at once. The Dragon King. Chapter 7. The Burning of the Books. The Dragon King watched the bonfire as it blazed up toward the sky. Around the fire the air was thick and wavy. Bamboo books were stacked beside the fire waiting to be burned. "Hurry," said the scholar. They jumped down from the cart and joined the crowd by the bonfire. The Dragon King shouted to the soldiers. They began throwing the books into the fire. The bamboo crackled as it burned. "Stop!" cried Annie. Jack grabbed her. "Quiet," he said. Annie pulled away. "Stop!" she shouted again, but her voice was lost in the noise of the roaring fire. "There's your story," said the scholar. He pointed to a bamboo book that had fallen off a waiting stack. "I'll get it," said Annie. She dashed over to the book. "Annie!" cried Jack, but she had already snatched up the bundle of bamboo strips and was charging back to them. "Got it! Quick, put it in your sack," she said. Jack put the bundle of bamboo strips in his sack. Then he looked around fearfully. He gasped. The Dragon King was glaring at them. Then he headed their way. "Seize them!" the Dragon King shouted. "Run through the burial grounds," the scholar said to Jack and Annie. "The soldiers will be afraid to follow. They fear the spirits of the ancestors." "Thanks," said Jack. "Thanks for everything." "Good luck," cried Annie. Then she and Jack took off. Soldiers shouted after them. An arrow whizzed by. But Jack and Annie kept running. They ran down the path to the burial grounds. They jumped over the low brick wall and ran between the huge mounds of earth. Suddenly arrows filled the air around them. The archers were shooting from the tower. "Look!" cried Jack. There was a doorway in one of the mounds. Jack and Annie ducked inside. They were in a long hall lit with oil lamps. "It's so quiet," said Annie. She walked down the passageway. "Hey, there are some steps here." "Don't go any farther," said Jack. "Why not?" said Annie. "We don't know what's down there," said Jack. "This is a burial tomb, remember? It's creepy." "Let's just take a quick look," said Annie. "Maybe it's the way out of here." Jack took a deep breath. "You might be right," he said. "Okay, but go slow." He didn't want to stumble upon a dead body. Annie started down the steep steps. Jack followed. The lamps lit their way as they kept going down and down. Finally, they reached the bottom. Jack blinked. Even though oil lamps glowed everywhere, it was hard to see at first.
Definitely no escape.
When Jack's
from this.
eyes got used to the strange light,
Thought if I
his
went the
heart
other way,
nearly stopped.
we wouldn't have traffic.
"Oh,
But
man,"
alas, we do.
he breathed. They were in a room